to have greater control over the cleaning of hospital wards to cut spiralling infection rates among patients. Doctors are warning that levels of the hospital superbug have now reached epidemic proportions. Every year, some 100,000 people in England pick up an infection in hospital. That results in an estimated 5,000 deaths a year. And fighting the superbug is already costing the NHS around £1 billion. Janet Barry reports.
Dr. Roger Arthur's wife went into hospital for a minor operation 2 years ago. Within 2 weeks, she was dead, a victim of the hospital's superbug MRSA. He leads a campaign for cleaner hospitals now. He says the government's tackling hospital-acquired infections far too late.
I blame the professionals as well for hiding it and not realising it. I blame the control hospital administrators for masking it in many ways, hoping it would go away. It won't go away.
1 in 11 hospital patients will catch an infection during their stay. Less than half catch MRSA. But there's so much concern about it because it's resistant to almost all known antibiotics. The government believes 5,000 people a year die from it in this country. Some experts believe that figure could be double. The measures the government set to announce this week are expected to include making hospitals publish their infection rates, helping frontline staff improve hygiene on the wards, and introducing regular cleanliness inspections by patients' groups.
Every time we make an advance, the superbugs will throw up another challenge. So I don't promise that there's a magic wand, but I do promise that we will make this a priority every bit as much as the people of this country think defeating this superbug problem is a priority.
In the Netherlands, fighting infection's been the priority for years. This is how they deal with cases of MRSA. Patients kept in isolation, staff sent home at the first sign they may be infected. Infection rates there are far lower than here. The government said now it wants more advice from abroad. Dr. Arthur will never know if these new measures could have saved his wife. He's waiting to be convinced they'll work. Government initiatives up till now, he says, have failed to stop the superbug. Janet Barry, BBC News.
2 cabinet ministers have dismissed reports that Tony Blair came close to resigning last month. The Education Secretary, Charles Clarke, and the Health Secretary, John Reid, were reported to be among 4 ministers who contacted the Prime Minister to urge him to stay on. But today, both men said Mr Blair never planned to step down. Our political correspondent, John Pienaar, reports.
Shoulder, Tony Blair's most loyal cabinet colleagues are rallying to his side again. They'd love to spend more time like this, talking up his plans for reforming schools and other services. Instead, they've been busy trying to contain another wave of speculation about Mr Blair's willingness to stay on as Prime Minister. Today's message, yes, they met him a few weeks ago, pledging support, but no, he never meant to quit.
I think his position is very strong, has always been strong, has never been under threat, and will continue up to the election and beyond. And I'm very glad that that's the case.
That loyalty is important. There's been no big find of chemical or biological weapons in Iraq. Mr Blair's admitted that day may never come, and it may be harder to justify the invasion after Wednesday's report on the intelligence case for war. It's likely to say the intelligence on Iraq weapons was weaker than it looked, and it'll add to the pressure on Mr Blair to say he was wrong.
Tony Blair, in response to the Butler report, is going to have to admit that, in fact, the big political judgments over the war in Iraq were quite simply got wrong. That is what people think, that is what the Americans now admit, and that, I think, is what he is going to have to come clean over with the public.
So, was material from the intelligence service, MI6, used for political purposes? Did Downing Street staff have too much influence? The Butler report is expected to say yes. Tonight's Panorama programme, after the news, will be reporting a source who says MI6 has withdrawn key intelligence. Lately, things have seemed to be going more Tony Blair's way, but there's always another tough week to get through. Has he turned the corner after many months of heavy pressure? Well, not quite yet.
Well, let's talk to John, who's in Downing Street now. John, we've heard much about this week being one of the trickiest for Tony Blair, but is this all becoming a bit of a cliché?
It is, frankly, a bit of a worn-out cliche, so let's just give it a bit of a rest and say that this week is going to be tough for Tony Blair, because it is. Wednesday's report, I think, is going to leave some of his closest colleagues rather singed. His chief of staff, the man that he appointed to run MI6, to name but two, and Tony Blair will not be left entirely unscathed, because it all rather bears on the way that Number 10 is run on his watch. And then on Thursday, we have two by-elections, Birmingham and Leicester, both prime opportunities for a bit of protest voting, maybe a lot of protest voting, and it means that tomorrow's big statement by the Chancellor on public spending really needs to go down well with the public.
John, as you say, the government announces its spending review tomorrow. Can they use this to regain the initiative somewhat?
Well, that would be the hope. I mean, we know a certain amount of what's in it, a lot more spending on health, a lot more spending on education. The need to limit the extra money for transport, for law and order, that needs to be finessed, but it will set out the terms of the argument. But the atmosphere at Westminster is still so feverish, the appetite for intrigue so great, that a lot of people, I think, are going to be watching this statement just for some sign of fault lines and tension between the Prime Minister and the man who would rather like his job sooner rather than later.
All right, John, thank you. The Israeli Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, has ordered construction work to continue on the security barrier being built in the West Bank, despite a ruling by the International Court of Justice that it's illegal. Earlier, Mr. Sharon claimed that the ruling had prompted Palestinian extremists to carry out a bomb attack in Tel Aviv, which killed a woman. James Reynolds reports.
4 months in Israel without a bomb until this morning. An explosion at a bus stop in Tel Aviv at the start of rush hour. It was set off by the Palestinian armed group, the Al-Aqsa Brigades. Israel's barrier will not stop us, they warn. Yes, it will, says Israel's Prime Minister, and The Hague cannot order it down. Israel completely rejects the International Court's ruling, he told his cabinet this morning. It is one-sided and politically motivated. And Mr. Sharon has now ordered building work to carry on, ignoring a call from the UN Secretary-General for Israel to abide by international law. So far, Israel's put up more than 100 miles of its West Bank barrier, with hundreds more still to go. The Palestinians may now have a legal victory, but they've got no immediate way of cashing it in. For the Palestinians, it's now very simple. The barrier is officially illegal, so it should be demolished at once. But for Israel, it's also very clear. Unless the fence is finished, there will be more bombings, like the one this morning. James Reynolds, BBC News, in the West Bank.
The billionaire retailer Philip Green has said he expects Marks & Spencer shareholders to make up their minds within days about his bid for the company. Last week, the Marks & Spencer board rejected his latest offer, which is worth more than £9 billion. The company's chief executive, Stuart Rose, will lay out his revival plan for M&S tomorrow. A new countryside code launched tomorrow will urge ramblers and other rural visitors to respect, protect and enjoy their surroundings. The updated code, covering England and Wales, has been prompted by new rights of access to the countryside. For the first time, it refers to the responsibilities of landowners. Asian leaders must act quickly to stop a new AIDS crisis. That's the warning from the United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan. He was speaking at an international AIDS conference in Thailand. The latest UN AIDS report shows one of the fastest growing epidemics is in Asia. There are now an estimated 8 million people living with HIV/AIDS in Asia. More than 1 million people were diagnosed with HIV there last year alone. And if action isn't taken quickly, the UN warns there could be 10 million more infections by the end of the decade. From Thailand, Karen Allen reports.
Sutep runs a small business with his parents. There's little to identify him as a man with HIV. In Thailand, people with the AIDS virus stand a better chance of getting drugs than many of their neighbours. The policy here has its critics, but it's keeping people alive.
Before, I was so very weak I couldn't do anything. My sister had to take me to the hospital. And now that I have got the drugs, I can work here at the shop.
But despite extra funding, drugs like these are still beyond the reach of most in the developing world. And in Asia, demand is growing. More than 8 million infections now on this side of the globe.
For tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, for tomorrow.
So, with a distinctive Thai flavour to the opening of this major AIDS conference, two leaders with stark warnings. The Thai Prime Minister cautioning against complacency. The UN Secretary-General saying Asia must act now to avoid following Africa's history of infection.
1 in 4 infections last year happened on this continent. There is no time to lose or waste if we are to prevent the epidemic in Asia from spinning out of control.
Outside, protesters angry that efforts to roll out drugs are too slow, that international trade agreements are holding things up, and that richer countries are failing to pull their weight.
Past gatherings like these have led to a reduction in the price of drugs. But AIDS activists know that the challenge now is to get the medicines out to the people who need them most. By the time this conference closes, 80,000 more people in the world will have been infected with HIV. Karen Allen, BBC News, Bangkok.
Now with news of the British Grand Prix and the rest of the day's sport, here's Hazel.
Thanks, Darren. Good evening to you. Michael Schumacher has done it again. He took the checkered flag at Silverstone. It's his 10th win from 11 races this season. The world champion finished ahead of McLaren's Kimi Raikkonen, with Ferrari's Rubens Barrichello in third place. Britain's Jenson Button was fourth.
Tickets for the British Grand Prix are like gold dust and cost as much, but the Formula One season's become a bit like a Sunday matinee. You still watch it, even though you usually know what happens in the end. Even the pre-race entertainment had a familiarity about it. Men in sleek red machines, travelling faster than anything else in sight. There was some interest at the start. Could Kimi Raikkonen in the McLaren hold on to his pole position? He could, for about 10 laps before he made his first pit stop. And when Michael Schumacher made his first stop, Ferrari's tactics were spot on again. He emerged onto the track in front of Raikkonen and led the British Grand Prix, and there the race was won. Pit strategies were the key. Minardi were too hasty with one of theirs as Jean-Maria Bruni sped off while still refuelling. A lack of concentration cost Jarno Trulli his race. It was a tribute to the safety of a Formula One car that he was unhurt. Raikkonen pushed hard in the final few laps but couldn't catch Schumacher. Jenson Button was chasing a podium finish but was outpaced by Rubens Barrichello's Ferrari. It was, though, quite predictably, the other red car that took the checkered flag to keep the prancing horse fluttering proudly above all others.
Schumacher's Ferrari will now lead the Formula One procession to Hockenheim in a fortnight. He's won 10 out of the 11 races so far, and with only 7 more to go, a 7th driver's title now seems inevitable. Ollie Foster, BBC News, Silverstone.
Frenchman Thomas Lavey has won golf's Scottish Open at Loch Lomond after completing a superb final round of 63 to finish on 15 under par. He began the final round some 7 shots behind the leaders, but his late charge was enough to collect the winner's cheque of £366,000. His win also guarantees him a place in this week's Open Championship at Royal Troon. The Olympic 100 metres champion Marion Jones will not defend her title in Athens after failing to make the US team for the event. Jones, who easily won gold in Sydney 4 years ago, couldn't secure her place in the 100 at the United States trials this weekend. She's currently fighting doping allegations, although she has never failed a drugs test. Meanwhile, at the Olympic trials in Manchester, there was little joy for an American hoping to run for the British team. California's Malachi Davis only received his new passport 4 days ago and had hoped to represent Britain in Greece, but now his fate is in the hands of the selectors.
A top 2 finish from Davis in the 400 metres would have seen him flying the flag for his adopted country. But in the end, as he faded to 5th, Tim Benjamin rightly stole the limelight with a storming finish to beat Daniel Keynes, the former British champion. Davis, whose mother was born in Britain, could still be selected, and the new champion at least has few complaints.
We need more guys like him, because at the moment, you know, we're not even going under 3 minutes to the relay team, so it's great that we're doing stuff like that. I think, great, bring it on.
On an afternoon of upsets, the biggest came from 20-year-old student Christina Huragu. The fast-improving Londoner stunned everyone, especially herself, by edging out Scotland's Lee McConnell in the 400, smashing her personal best and ducking under the Olympic qualifying time. Not all good news, though, for more familiar faces. Darren Campbell pulled out before the 200 metres final with a rib injury, and Olympic heptathlon champion Denise Lewis was last seen limping away from the Manchester track. But perhaps the most joyous image of the day was that of Jade Johnson, delight tinged with relief as she finally achieved the Olympic qualifying standard. She's a long jumper who's allergic to sand. Fortunately, we know of no aversion to precious metal, for an Athens medal is a realistic hope.
Now, a loose dog caused havoc at the Tour de France today, bringing down a host of cyclists just 7 kilometres from the finish. The crash happened during the 8th stage, but didn't affect any of the race leaders. The stage was won by Norway's Thor Hushovd. 5-time defending champion Lance Armstrong finished well down the field. A shaggy dog story to finish. That's it, Darren.
Indeed. All right, Hazel, thank you. Well, let's get the latest on the weather now with Michael Fish. Michael.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Only a miserable 12 degrees this afternoon at Buxton. That's well below the average for the time of year. Austria didn't fare much better either. They were 9 degrees below average and not very far away. Actually, there was a fair bit of snow. All right, admittedly, it was on the mountains, but it's unusual for the time of the year nevertheless. But I can promise you some warmer weather around the middle of the week, 22 degrees or so. But unfortunately, I can only promise it for the southeastern corner because the rest of the country looks as if it's going to stay quite unsettled. Now, at the moment, there's a fair bit of cloud, mostly over the east, and that cloud's actually giving 1 or 2 spits and spots of rain. That sort of thing continuing through the night, fair bit of cloud, little rain here and there, but at least a blanket of cloud will make it perhaps not such a chilly night as we've been having just recently, and a fair bit of cloud, of course, to start the day tomorrow, more particularly in central and eastern areas, the odd light shower, spot of rain here and there. I think it will be fairly bright in the west with some sunshine, a little bit of sunshine breaking through in eastern areas, but that's only going to trigger 1 or 2 of those showers again. Best sunshine of all during the day, I think, will be later on in the west as the cloud begins to dissolve. And it should be a little bit warmer in most places, I think, around about 19 degrees or so in the sheltered south, but still that cool breeze blowing along that eastern coast. Tuesday, a much better day all round, certainly for the north and east, dry, a bit warmer too, a fair bit of sunshine. But unfortunately in the west later on in the day, the cloud will thicken, bringing some outbreaks of rain along. And then as we saw a while ago, that rain is going to affect many parts of the country on Wednesday, eventually clearing from the north, and I think the southeastern corner staying dry and bright, and as I said, reasonably warm. That's all from me. Back to Darren.
All right, Michael, thank you. Now, before we go, a reminder of the main news tonight. New hygiene targets to fight the spread of the hospital superbug, MRSA, will be published tomorrow. Now, here on BBC One, Panorama. For the first time on television, 2 top defence intelligence officers describe how thin was the intelligence that took Britain to war with Iraq. Here's John Ware.